Are the Montreal Canadiens' hearts not really in the play-in series? What is up, viewer out there watching the Relax back here, and normally I do not entertain topics like this. I don't usually go and insinuate that there is some form of tanking that exists within the NHL teams that are actually being perpetrated by these teams themselves. Normally, when we talk about tanking, it comes on the form of what the fan base believes would be the best case for the teams. Oh, I'm a fan of the Canucks, but I really wouldn't be opposed to the Canucks losing to the Wild because a 1-in-8 shot at Lafreniere sounds very good. It's that kind of idea. The idea that some teams are cheering for their favorite teams to lose because they want that 1-in-8 Alexei Rimouski shot. But today we're talking about this from the Habs' point of view, and not because of anybody in particular that is not noteworthy. What we're talking about here is what Elliotte Friedman said on the most recent 31 Thoughts podcast episode with him and Jeff Marek. Now, I'll leave a link in the description to the entire podcast. It's an hour and a half long, so you can listen to that while going for a run or playing video games or cooking or whatever. It's a great way to kill some time and get some info as to what's going on in the league. But Friedman's comments on Montreal specifically were so weird that I just wanted to bring it up here in this video today because the message behind these comments could depict something bigger than just a play-in series matchup against the Penguins. So, let's get into it. Now, before we get underway, I'm not going to be taking clips from the podcast and playing it here. I know this is a primarily audio-based YouTube channel, but because that is a podcast copyrighted by Sportsnet using the likenesses and words of Marek and Friedman, we're just going to be going onto Twitter and taking a look at some transcribed quotes that people have posted that actually indicate what Friedman is saying. Furthermore, we have ourselves this article from TVA Sports with somewhat of a clickbaity title, a team that doesn't really want to play in quotations, but I will say it does have some extra quotes here from Friedman as well, so we're going to be using this to look at some of these quotes too. So, it comes early on in the episode, after talking a little bit about the introductions and being a morning person and getting back to playing. Friedman and Marek start talking about the NHL's entire return-to-play process, and Friedman notes that when it came to the early-on discussions with this process, the Montreal Canadiens apparently really battled with the NHLPA. Going over to the TVA Sports article, of course, this is in French translated to English via Google Translate. The very end of the article talks about this idea as well. The telephone discussion between the high authorities of the Canadiens and the NHLPA was apparently quite animated, according to information gathered by Friedman. I'm told the Canadiens have really been in a showdown with the union. Nobody wanted to tell me exactly what was said, but it seems that it was something. Now, what exactly were they arguing about? Well, Friedman says the Montreal Canadiens were out. They traded Kovalchuk. They waved the white flag on the season, and all of a sudden, they're put back into the play-in series. Friedman suggests, I don't know how much their hearts were into it, if we just put it that way. So essentially it boils down to that. The Canadiens were in a position where they kind of accepted that they weren't going to be a playoff team, and if you take a look at their trade deadline trades, it's very evident that that's what they felt. In the span of about 2 days on the trade deadline, the Montreal Canadiens traded away Ilya Kovalchuk, who was arguably the team's hottest player at the time, Nick Cousins, bottom 6 depth, Matthew Pekka, bottom 6 depth, and Nate Thompson, bottom 6 depth, and probably one of the better pieces of bottom 6 depth the team has had in this season. The Canadiens were in a position where they were willing to give this up because what they got in return was valuable to them at that time frame. 4th round picks, 3rd round picks, 7th round picks, 5th round picks. They were getting rid of their players today because they wanted futures for tomorrow. And that perspective, which is what they gave out during the trade deadline, kind of told everybody, yeah, this team probably doesn't want to make the playoffs anymore since they just traded away Kovalchuk and they got a pick back. So good on them. But now that they're in the play-in series, it does kind of make sense as to why some would say the Habs' hearts may not be in it 100%. Which is why to me, when Friedman says the calls between the Canadiens and the NHLPA, they were very animated and somewhat confrontational, that doesn't surprise me. It doesn't surprise me that a Montreal Canadiens team that was already focused on the draft and the upcoming free agency period would not want to entertain a playoff discussion because, hey, if they win against the Penguins, all of a sudden their first round pick is in the 15 and beyond range, and after that there isn't really any guarantee that the Canadiens are going to be able to win anyways because they didn't prep their team for this. This was not in the agenda. They had already established to the masses, the fans, and the media that yes, we are going to go forward for next season because we traded away our bottom six depth and our hottest player in the span of about 2 days, which is kind of indicative of where our goals lie for the short-term future. Elliotte Friedman also talks about the false positives that we highlighted in our Montreal Canadiens news package video. There were some false positive virus tests with the team, and people told Elliotte Friedman to be careful with that one. So you have a team that doesn't really want to be there, and now they have a testing issue. They are the first team that we know of to have a false positive issue. And add to that the potential of the Habs getting a first overall pick to take a star local talent if they lose to Pittsburgh. Friedman says there is a lot going on with the Canadiens right now. Back over onto the TVA Sports article. This is what Elliotte Friedman said on the podcast. Of course, it's translated to French, translated back into English, so it's not verbatim, but if you listen to the podcast, this is pretty much the idea that Friedman says. The players are not convinced that they want to resume competition. If Shea Weber and Carey Price say that they want to win now, do you think they're blind to which player the team will draft first if they don't win? There is a lot going on with this team. I really believe it. So, this kind of opens our eyes to a completely different perspective to this Canadiens team. Throughout the past few days, have we talked about the good things? Yes, we have talked about the good things. We've talked about Romanov and how his great attitude will help him towards becoming a pro. We talked about what Claude Julien is saying about Suzuki and Kotkaniemi and the rest of the team. We've talked about how they're coming back and how players are looking good. We've talked about the good things. But even when we talk about the good things, my comment section is flooded with comments by Habs fans saying, you know what, that's great, but I would rather see Lafreniere instead. And it's the same for me. Even though there's great news that Noah Juulsen is coming back, that he honestly is looking pretty good, even though there's news that Kotkaniemi is apparently better than he was at the beginning of last season, I still want Lafreniere. And the fans, the media, people like me, we all have this idea that obviously the Montreal Canadiens themselves would not be blind to. Which is why, when you take a look at it, it doesn't surprise me in the slightest that this team apparently argued with the NHLPA as to whether or not to include them. But that, of course, is just speculation. There's no real confirmed truth to that. That's just Elliotte Friedman reporting hearsay. I will say, though, that whole idea of the Canadiens arguing with the NHLPA is kind of weird to me, because if they indeed did contest this and they said, we don't want to be a part of this, I question internally why exactly they did not disagree with it when the voting came. Because when we learned about the voting process that the teams had with the NHL's return to play format, we only had 2 teams that said no. The Tampa Bay Lightning and the Carolina Hurricanes. The Lightning said no because they were uncertain with the overall safety of the process. And the Carolina Hurricanes, they were pretty much just scared of the Rangers, and they did not want to play against the team that had their first round pick. And if you watched our video on the Carolina Hurricanes proposal, you would have seen the proposal they made. They proposed a best out of 5 series, but the Hurricanes would have needed to win 2 out of the 5. Meanwhile, the Rangers would have needed to win 4 out of the 5 to advance. It was really weird. But according to that report, it was only those 2 teams that said no. So, because Friedman is saying here that the Canadiens apparently argued with the NHLPA, I question why exactly they said yes to the proposal when the voting process came, but obviously that's just an entirely different subject as well. Maybe the NHL just did a really good job in convincing the Habs, you know what, we need the revenue. You guys have a huge hockey market, and we're missing out on so much revenue by not including you guys. But obviously, this whole discussion that Friedman brings up has an entirely different subtext behind it as to whether or not the Canadiens' hearts are really in this play-in series entirely, and whether or not it's not just the fans and the media and people like me and you that want this team to lose for Lafreniere. but it might be the Habs themselves. Talk to me in the comments below what you think about this whole idea. Am I full of crap, or does Elliot Friedman have a point? I hope you enjoyed this video. This was Trolls99, and bye.